Okay, so shall we start with Saturn in Pisces? Maybe a few
Sure, sure,
concepts or themes or feelings about that.
sure. Okay. So I want to start by establishing a perspective on what are we doing whenever we look at Saturn. Okay. What I value about my own training in evolutionary astrology is that it provides a framework for understanding the inherent interrelationship between all planetary functions. So the starting point that I want to offer is just really recognizing fundamentally, what are we doing here in time and space? What is the purpose or the function of time and space? So we think, we have to make money, we have to pay the bills, we have to get a job, we have to be on time, and we also want to make sure we don't cross a red light and we follow the traffic rules and we pay our taxes. Like there's a very tangible, practical, cultural, social, political experience that we're all involved in. We also all have bodies, and the bodies have rules. There are consequences to treating the body a certain way. The totality of our physical reality, we can say, is very defined. In fact, everything that's physical by its very nature is defined. And everything that's defined becomes that over time. Literally, that's what time does. Time defines things. Everything is becoming something. So I just want to take a step back and look at that facet of our experience, because it's easy to take it all for granted and just say, yeah, that's what do you mean? That's what life is. You got to, pay the bills. You got to be a good citizen. You got to have a good diet, or have a family. You do these things. And in various ways, we're all born into a world where there's sort of some kinds of assumptions about what it means to be a human being. And some of us question these assumptions. Some of us question these norms. Some of us learn to live within them while inwardly remaining free from identifying with them. But it's incredibly valuable and helpful, and it's healing to take a step far back enough to ask, what is the meaning of this life in the first place? Because Saturn, on the most basic level, are the parameters, structures, limitations, and boundaries that are manifest within our physical human experience. But if we don't really understand the purpose of this physical human experience, we run the risk of giving meaning and value to the physical parameters, limitations, forms, and structures of our life without understanding the greater purpose that they are meant to serve.
Hmm.
So I want to offer the perspective that the essence of this life is for our ongoing learning and realization. And we can get pretty metaphysical just in terms of our perspective of how everything in this world, everything in this life, in its essence, is relevant. Everything we can think of, in the perspective that I hold in my work and just how I practice my life, everything in our life, we learn to internalize it and bring it back to, this is all the template for my ongoing learning. We can say this is like the forum of love. What are we learning? Like, what is the thing that we're realizing? We're really remembering who we are. We are remembering our essential identity, our eternal self. And it's indescribable, right? Like our true essence itself, our awakened being, is beyond anything we can grasp or hold on to. But this is what this life is about. And so we can also think of it, and this is a Pluto thing, it's really a process of elimination, right? All of our fixations and identifications, like, oh, did that, went through that, I'm not that, that came and went, right? So when we have that perspective, which is a very compassionate perspective, it says whatever happens, this is where we're learning. We
Hmm.
don't have to maybe understand the curriculum. Maybe we don't understand the form the curriculum is taking or exactly how it's meant to teach us, but we can appreciate, okay, here's my curriculum. This is where remembering can happen. This is the template for my realization. And that's how I like to look at Saturn,
Hmm.
just to then regard every facet of our physical reality as the temporary, because it's all temporary. And Saturn is temporary. Time is temporary as well. The temporary container within which we are going to play out particular phases of learning experience. And a great metaphor for that would be going through grade school, right? When you're in 9th grade, or when you're in 10th grade, or when you're in 11th grade, in essence, no matter where you are at, it's the same idea. In each grade, there's a learning curriculum, and you have to pass. You have to apply yourself to the curriculum, and if you don't, you'll repeat it. The level of learning might intensify or become more holistic or more complex or more inclusive as one grows. But that's what Saturn is. And we can really appreciate that the structural realities of our life, and thus we can say all of the limitations everywhere in our life where we're called to give attention. We can think of Saturn as the gravity of our concentration. It draws us into awareness, into concentration, into presence. Oh, here's something. And if I don't bring alignment and thoughtfulness into this area of my life won't be functional. And these situations will repeat and keep on coming up over and over and over again. So we're bringing our attention to whatever parameters are manifest in our life. And then what happens is we master it. Right? You don't repeat 10th grade. You don't repeat 11th grade. You master it. And when you've mastered something, you're done. Right? It rests, it's complete. Then you can look back at it and appreciate. So we can all look back at our own adolescence, our own learning, our own failings, right? Like the best learner is the good failure. It's a person who fails really well, fails quickly. We can look back at all of that in our life and just recognize, oh, yes, I was swimming around this curriculum for a while and I've learned that. And the learning continues according to the evolutionary needs of the soul. So to complete this introductory piece, I just want to say it's all about bringing it back to the soul. And I want to just define what I mean when I speak about soul. It's who we are. It's that which we are when we remove our ego construct, our personality, our personal memories, our body. It's the essence that we are that's having this human experience, right? So most souls don't identify themselves as that because we're very much identified with the time-space experiences. But as we evolve, as we awaken, we learn to recognize, in a sense, I'm here having this experience. It might feel hard or complex or confusing at times, but actually I'm always, in a sense, in this world, but really not of it. This is not definitive of who I am in my essence. And so it brings a thoughtfulness. How can I make the best out of my present moment circumstances? How can I use my time as wisely as possible? And I think what's challenging, a threshold that we come across when we really start to look at Saturn from a soul perspective, is we don't know what we don't know. Okay, so I'll just complete this thought with, we come into life experiences where the curriculum is given, and we don't come with a conscious awareness of, I'm going to come into this family, this culture, this environment. For the first 7 years of my life, it's all handed to you, right? I mean, for a big part of our life as children, it's actually a part of the soul program. It's a part of the template that we chose to create for ourselves. And so it takes time. We actually yield ourselves to be imprinted by our conditioning. And then we might have to go through experiences of unraveling that. And it's all a part of whatever learning is most beneficial and supportive to our own ongoing growth.
Yeah, beautiful. Very well said. Absolutely. I guess perhaps what I would say to that as well is with the whole concept and life journey and experience, Saturn, you're very right. It frames really the concept of time and our movement through time as we grow and develop and become more aware and have more life experiences and things of that nature. And I found personally that because I've got a pretty strong Saturn in my own chart squaring the nodes, right? So
Oh, okay.
something pretty important about it. And so, long story short, it's the process of integration with any planet, actually, but really with Saturn, I feel that when you can integrate those deeper components of the soul's intentions with whatever that planet is trying to teach you, as it were, then it becomes, you become that energy, is what I'm trying to say. You become the best version of that energy because of that integration process, right? So, I mean, a simple example, just to draw the contrast, when you're a teenager, often Saturn is projected onto, you know, all your authorities, right? Your parents and teachers, etc. And so you experience Saturn so much from the world out there as it appears, right? And so as we continue to grow and learn from our lessons, and that's how we acquire wisdom, right? We learn that Saturn is not out there. Saturn is here. I am Saturn. I am Mars. I am Venus, and so on and so forth.
Oh, beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, I love thinking and meditating and reflecting that, because I've had just recently, I've had Saturn in my 12th, over my Mars, over my ascendant, over my moon, through my first house. So at this stage and age in my life, going through those sorts of Saturn transits and squaring my natal Saturn and so on and so forth, it's really been a very powerful, clear, conscious integration process that's been hard, really hard, but incredible as well. So yeah, I just wanted to add that about the awareness of integrating and individuating as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the teenager piece, because there's something very important to recognize. Since we come into this world, we don't know the way. I mean, on a very basic level, we don't know not to run into traffic. So the Saturn function, we are dependent on the world outside of us to be that Saturn. And this is where, according to the soul program, I mean, if we have healthy parental conditioning, we can be taught, we can fail without the shame being added. That's a big part of the distortion of the Saturn archetype, when mistakes and failure are associated with you're bad now, right?
Yeah.
Where punishment comes into the picture, as opposed to everything truly, truly, truly being seen as a lesson in alignment, right? Like there's right, which is aligned, and there's wrong, which is not aligned, as opposed to wrong being its own original quality. And so the idea is we get to learn from those that we trust to hold our lives. And we get to really role model, look up to other people that have lived a life that we haven't lived and have wisdom that we can't yet apprehend. And so as we mature, if we're willing to make mistakes and correct them, if we're willing to look at those who came before us, but also willing to, in the end of the day, look inside for our own internal approval. And that's one of the deepest challenges with Saturn, where we can become hooked on what we think the outer world is approving of. Because again, this is kind of what we're taught. Do a good job. So then getting an A on the test is valuable more than the personal learning that we undergo. And the form and the structure can easily become its own God. And so the deepest work of Saturn is really learning to access our own inner authority, to find for ourselves our own alignment. And there is a lot of deconditioning. It does very, very often mean breaking the rules or taking a step back from the right, perfect, good-looking life that one has been living, to actually come to know oneself from within. What is livable? This is why the archetype of depression is very common within the Saturn experience, because it really impels a soul to take a step back from the structural reality, from the status quo, and to question, am I happy? Is this the life I want to be living? Am I where I want to be? And is this getting me where I want to go? And this can be so scary, because, and we'll really delve into this with Pisces, a part of the Saturn work anywhere in any chart necessarily is a deconstruction process, because we have to be able to make a distinction between the voices from the outside that we've internalized, that we're then unconsciously projecting, I'm needing their approval and I need to be this and fit these conditions. We need to distinguish between that and our true inner voice. Sometimes we need to unravel the life we've created, the perfect world we've created, and it might feel chaotic. We might experience emotions and desires and feelings and things that we didn't know were there, we didn't want to see. And that this is like the issue of, to give the metaphor, we might be functioning so well in 8th grade, but we're 30 years old. And maybe no one else recognizes that. But our soul says, oh, I feel like this isn't the right place for me. There's something else. This is not the structural reality is not serving my own soul growth. And so in the end of the day, the deepest dimension of the Saturn work is being able to know for ourselves and only for ourselves what is right and what path we need to take. And that's where wisdom comes in. It's like the discipline, the training work that is necessary with Saturn. Anywhere you want to go takes repetition in time, which creates conditioning. But for that to really be authentic, there has to be a sort of wisdom and self-knowledge at the core of it.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. And so Saturn moving into Pisces, within the context of everything you just shared, I feel this journey of becoming our own teacher, our own authority, as it were, self-realization, awakening to who we are, our essence, right? In Pisces, there's so much, I mean, it's so complex, we could really talk about it for hours, but one of the ideas, that I was thinking about was, in a very plain consensus sort of way, Saturn does speak to fear, right? Conditioning, of course. So in Pisces, I feel the asking is to surrender, right? And to completely let go and trust what you can't control, essentially, which is, I feel, most of life anyway, right? You really can't control very much in life at all, really. So in Pisces, I think the journey, collectively, and then for each of us individually, depending on where it is in our chart and so forth, is going to have a strong element of the asking of, we need to trust what we can't see, or what we can't control, and just let go to source, as it were, let that paradigm of the story that you hold, the things you identify with, the narratives and so forth, and understand that there is something higher at play here, and finding a way to surrender to that, I feel is going to be a really important part of this Saturn in Pisces, as well as letting go of some dreams you may have had, the realization that those dreams will not actualize for whatever reason that is. And so it is a time of endings and surrendering and trusting and just letting go almost into the abyss, as it were, which is Pluto in the 12th house. And I've had that for the last 15 years. So I'm very, very familiar with that feeling, right? So that's one of the ideas that I was feeling into with Saturn in Pisces. Yeah.
That surrender is such an essential part of this. And I think what can feel confusing is Saturn also speaks to effort and work, discipline and training. And so it really brings up the question, how do we cultivate a stance and a practice of surrender? And what does that really mean? I want to share something I've been thinking about recently that I feel this really brings some essential perspective to the Saturn in Pisces, and in particular, this dissolving and this letting go and trusting. Because one of the fun things about life is dissolving and surrendering and letting go and forgiving will look on the appearance level very different person to person. So I know people who, used to travel with the Grateful Dead. And at some point they met some religious Orthodox Jews and they became Hasidic Jews, right? Very free, open, fluid, no boundaries, no structure, to a very conservative, very religious, defined spiritual path. I've been seeing a lot of people, a lot of friends, a lot of people on Facebook are denouncing New Age spirituality and they're returning to their Christian roots. I've been seeing it a lot. A lot of people are just reconnecting with a more traditional, and a lot of public figures as well, more traditional Christianity. And I also know the opposite. I know a lot of people that grew up with more orthodoxy that have let go of that rigidity and the judgment and the rules to a more open, fluid spirituality. You can really see both of those. And I think right now there's a renaissance happening, not so much in any particular direction, but it's a renaissance in people wanting something of substance to hold on to, wanting meaning. Because Pisces says, we all know deep inside that there is something essentially meaningful, and we're trying to reconcile with this existential sense of life, of the problem of life, or the struggle of existence. Where is peace? Where's home? Where's unity? Where can I finally arrive and be done with the endless suffering, right? And Pisces teaches us our salvation is only true identity, which is in our relationship to our source. And there are, of course, many ways to articulate that inexpressible idea. But it's found within. It's found in going kind of outside of the parameters of the world and inside. For some people, during Saturn and Pisces, there will be a very fervent humility that will impel them to turn towards more religious structure. So Saturn and Pisces conjures the imagery of a nun, a monk, a secluded monastery, very traditional. Saturn, ancient traditions, has roots, but allows for deep spiritual contemplation, right? And that's a signature of humility, of letting go. I tried to do it my own way, Saturn, but I failed. So I'm going to accept the instruction and the guidance of those who have come before me and surrender completely to that. But just as much, we can have a soul, Saturn and Pisces, who is living a life in the pure religious or spiritual monastic church environment. They're pure, they do all the things right. There's a time in my life where I was praying every day, attending congregation 3 times a day, and I felt safe. I just immersed myself in the waters of religion. For as long as that was working for me, it was working for me. And we know that there does come a point for so many souls where there's a crisis between, I feel so safe here, but I'm repressing a whole lot too. There are all these rules and laws and judgments, and I can't seem to get beyond that. And so then Saturn and Pisces is dissolving the rigidness. So really, whether it's bringing, what the issue with Pisces, interestingly enough, is it's everything, right? So Pisces can be the atrophication of our muscles, or anything that's atrophied because we're not putting forth effort, right? So Saturn, no boundaries. I'll go where the wind goes, and what we're not defining, Saturn and Pisces, what we're not defining means we're just going to be open to happenstance, and we'll be defined by anything at all. And we can speak in a moment, because addictions and dopamine addictions and distracting ourselves with anything that will help us escape from the world and stay distracted. Right? So Saturn and Pisces can just be, I'm fluid and I'm open, but look, I'm on my phone all day and I'm taking a lot of drugs and I'm watching the screen all day and I'm distracting myself. I need something to surrender to. I need something to hold, right? And can everyone feel the gravity of that? It's like a desperation, recognizing I'm lost without something greater than my own thinking. And to then hold on to that and commit to that says, in time, I will become strengthened through that. But Pisces just as much can speak to absolute delusion, where we can become bigger than life, or something or someone can become bigger than life, and we make it so important, giving all of this power to a religious or parental or spiritual authority, or to a religious institution. By the way, just so everyone can understand this, this arc, Jupiter Sagittarius corresponds to belief systems, our cosmology, our perspective, our understanding of reality. But it's Saturn in Capricorn that takes that and makes it into a religion that gives guidelines and rules for how to live. Right? So when we're really looking to like address a dimension of our life that speaks to how are we living, how are we structuring our life, the do's and the don't do's, the yamas, niyamas, the 10 commandments, right? How to eat, how to do relationship, what to do as a man, what to do as a woman, that's all Saturn. And we get to a point where we've given it so much meaning, and our culture, our community, our society, our church will be behind that. And that piece inside will be speaking, which says, it's not working. I'm not where I want to be. And so Saturn in Pisces can really speak to this existential anxiety and this, or this terror really, of dissolving everything we've known and exchanging that for forgiveness, which we can only get it if we understand somewhere inside that I can't make myself something that I'm not. So I'm going to have to forgive what I thought was real
Mm,
and open up to a path that I do not understand, but trust it.
mm,
So
yeah.
qualitatively, whether we're going to become more conservative or more liberal, right? It's really the same thing.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I think also with that, because Capricorn is sextile Pisces, right?
Mm,
And so there's a connection there, right, with those archetypes. And I've seen some of the most bizarre and amazing relationships with a Pisces person and a Capricorn person, in the sense of just how incredibly well they complement each other, right? And the world they create, because the Saturn or Capricorn energy really brings in the consolidation and grounding and work,
mm,
how to make things happen, as it were, the seriousness, the time that it takes, all those things. And then you've got the beautiful Pisces over here, which brings in the visions and the dreams. So when you combine those energies together, I feel like we can. I'm not talking about being unrealistic with the movement that started decades ago and that had the perspective, if you visualize it, you can manifest it. You cannot manifest $1 million in your bank. It just doesn't happen. But I'm talking about um, the more soulful qualities of Pisces, and how you can really work with the Saturn energy to to feel more aligned and more integrated and more
mm,
grounded in your spiritual practice, in your spiritual life, in what that looks like, what that feels like, and what do I need to do to make that grow. How do I nurture that, how do I feed that, and so forth. So I love Saturn in Pisces, actually. I feel the combination, it has got some shadow, qualities, like everything does, of course. And there are some difficulties about it, for sure. But I think it can be a very beautiful experience as well, depending on how we work with that energy, right? Because Saturn is the work. It's
absolutely.
the endless teacher, endless teacher of deep wisdom. And in ancient astrology, Saturn is the magician.
Oh, interesting, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He's the magician, he's the magi. So he's just, there's so much wisdom from Saturn.
I'm so glad you mentioned this piece around, like wishful thinking.
Yeah.
We can easily fall into that, and that's a Pisces issue. People often say Saturn is reality, and I just say, Pisces, Neptune is reality.
Mm,
Saturn is time and space. It's like not all of reality. It's Maya. It's the illusion. The illusion doesn't mean it's not real. It's not reality in its entirety.
That's
It
right.
has existence, but we have to understand it in its greater context, like what it's really about. I think of time and space as like it'll come and it'll go. Time is, I often quote a Course in Miracles and explaining time relative to Saturn. The purpose of time is to learn how to use time purposefully.
Mhm.
That's it.
That's so simple and so profound. Yeah.
And so when we look at this idea of wishful thinking, this is where we can lack that alignment and that strength. Imagine this example of wishing for $1 million, and meanwhile Saturn in Pisces will be bringing us to what areas of our life are we just checked out? Where are we not present? You're seeking to manifest $1 million. Have you paid your rent on time? Are you showing up for work? And so there can be I don't want to deal with the work or the effort of manifestation. And that's why I really appreciate that it might mean letting go of certain dreams. And sometimes the dreams and the visions that we have, it's not that they're wrong, it's that they're oftentimes a replacement for a deeper satisfaction that will only come through applying ourselves. I've been listening to, have you heard of Dr. Huberman? Andrew Huberman?
No.
He's like really cool dude. He's a neuroscientist. And so I've been listening to a lot of talks about dopamine and addiction. And just like this one beautiful perspective that just it really inspires my heart. In ancient times, there was a very natural flow between what we can say pain and pleasure, or like effort and reward, right? You had to do a lot of work to get the food to feed your family, right? You had to hunt, you had to have physical strength, you had to be on your feet, you had to actively engage. And the more we've become technologically dependent, wherein that technology has nothing to do with any of our efforts, like none of us know how to fix these phones, and we had nothing to do with the creation or the making of them. And so we're bombarded at this time, in this day and age, with ongoing experiences and opportunities for stimulation and distraction, right? So we can actually have a dopamine experience, and dopamine is simply, it's the neurotransmitter that has to do with the experience of pleasure and satisfaction. We can experience a dopamine rush without having put any effort beforehand, right? It's not the result of like a really good workout, now you're feeling rested, or working really hard to like hunt the deer and now you bring it back to your family. We can just sit on a couch and scroll through Instagram, and this becomes an addiction. He defines addiction so beautifully. It's the narrowing of things, that it's the progressive and gradual narrowing of things that provide pleasure. So addiction is manifest when we become progressively fixed on a narrowing field of pleasure producing experiences. So we're looking for that next fix, more screen time, the codependency in relationship, how another person makes us feel. And so what could happen here is we can condition our reality, Saturn, to experience what happens when we feel pleasure and satisfaction. Everything's okay, right? Life is okay. I feel good about life in that moment. So it's satisfaction. And yet if we're bombarding ourselves with that, and it's actually manifesting as a distraction from our life, and actually putting forth effort to create and define our life according to what we believe is meaningful, we're going to be conditioning a reality that's grounded, that has roots in avoidance, in distraction, in the dream. And so that's a Saturn and Pisces issue, right? Total delusion, where we've conditioned and structured an addictive reality, and we're just lost in it. And then things have to get, so what's like the Virgo polarity here? Things have to get so dysfunctional that finally calls us to sober up and wake up and realize, wow, I've created this. This is not where I want to be. How do I get out of it? I think that's like that's the beginning point with Saturn and Pisces. What is the work that I need to do? And so we can't just be wishful thinking, and because the work with Saturn anywhere, it always has to feel very accessible, right? It's not like wait and find out. Saturn is always every day you get to work on it, and you're not going to do a great job, but you're just going to keep on trying and you'll get better at it over time. It's very practical.
Mm, mm. I'm glad you brought that flip side in, because I think that's really important to address and to be aware of, in contrast to what I was talking about with Capricorn, Pisces being sextile, and giving an example of how that could be embodied on a positive level. But the reality is that what you've just shared is going to be a pretty significant theme for a lot of people, I would think. Yeah.
The loss of meaning in life is a big issue here, because when we find out that we've been distracting ourselves with dopamine fixations or distractions from what's inside, we're left with a sense of, I don't even know what's meaningful. What's the purpose of my life? Or, what do I do with this pain or this trauma or this grief or this sense of aloneness? I think it's necessary, and Saturn and Pisces will bring this up, to really face ourselves, and this the greater discomfort that is a part of this experience, I feel, and to to be willing to be that uncomfortable, and then to recognize I'm not the first one who's experienced this. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not making up the rules here. There are others who have come before. No one can know my reality in its entirety, and that's important that we understand that. But there are those who can understand parts of it. There are those who have come before that have suffered and experienced what I've gone through in their own ways. And there's humility in that. There's a lot of peace and beauty in recognizing I don't have to do this alone. And that's the gift that Pisces offers at this time. There's an immense amount of spiritual inspiration. You mentioned earlier, it can be a time of endings and things coming to completion. Some of us might find ourselves walking a path where we're given meaning, right? Like, we may not know what seeds we've been planting. Suddenly we might find that the doors are open for us, and we're called to be an inspiration. We're called to actually give a life of meaning by doing something in service that benefits other people. It could be a music, it could be writing, right? It can be something that happened that maybe we didn't think. Because what's Pisces? Pisces is unconditional love, and the truth will flow. This is a beautiful thing to think about. The truth will flow wherever the space is created for it, which means wherever there isn't a vibration of resistance,
I
which means in
love
the most
that.
innocent places of our being,
I
which
love.
also means it's not going to be where we thought it's going to be. It's very fascinating, because where we think it's going to be are actually most often the places we're most attached. And that's where we have the most resistance, right? The parts of us that are just pure and innocent and loving are actually often, I find, the parts of our being that as children, um, it's just who we are. Like, it's just like the part of ourself that is pure. Maybe we forgot about it because we grew up, right? Those are the places within us where love will flow and work through us, and it'll be like, oh, that makes total sense. And we're not doing, right? It's like that wu wei concept. We're allowing and we're opening and trusting. But like, when you stand on top of a hill and you pour the bucket of water out, just watch where it goes. Like, that's a big part. And so the coming to completion, right? Like this closure, we might find that meaning is provided by way of our life being directed and guided under control of something beyond our own making.
Yes.
It's like you use me for your purposes. That's one very important facet. Just as much as we might find ourselves in that place of desperation, really turning towards something outside of ourselves as well that we might find deeply inspiring, right? That's where people have those, return to Jesus moments. We might find ourselves deeply inspired by a teacher or a path, an experience that will just open up new doors, and suddenly all we want to do is get closer to that. And
Yeah.
Saturn is like, we want to get so close to it because we know we need roots. We want to water it every day. And, everyone here, we all have our practices. Some of us have deeper spiritual practices and walk different traditions. I think the invitation, the prayer for this transit is we want to grow deep roots. So whatever it is, we want to really walk that path that feels so important to us, that we're holding onto it so tightly, that we want to become so anchored in it. And if we can recognize that it's really on the deepest level, it's a path of love. It's a path of healing and forgiveness and giving meaning back to what this life is truly about.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I think it's a tricky one because it's, on the one hand, you're being asked to um, take a sense of commitment towards something,
Mm.
have a serious kind of attitude about your spiritual life, as it were.
Mm.
And then on the other hand, Pisces is asking you to let go, right? So there's two opposite ends there in play. And I
Mhm.
think the key is to obviously find the middle ground, to have that balance of both, right?
Right, absolutely.
But I love what you said, because I every night, I practice meditation every night, sometimes in the mornings as well. And that sometimes includes prayer or reflections, whatever it is. But two things I always do is gratitude, offer gratitude for every single day. And I also always ask the divine source, creation to all things, to show me what my path is, from the point of view of, you use me, use my body, use my mind, use my soul. I'm here to be that, right? To share that, to give that. So that's something that I've always been strongly connected with, probably since I was very, very young, actually. Yeah.
Mm.
So
Can I share something to that? There's a quote in A Course in Miracles that I just love. Um, and it really speaks to the idea of prayer and will and request. And there's this one teaching that says, it's like a prayer, and it says something to the likes of, I want what you give to me in exactly the form that you choose.
yeah,
No, it's one of my favorite thoughts.
that's kind of very Saturn in Pisces. Yeah.
It absolutely is.
Surrendering to the form that's been given to you, right?
Yeah.
Saturn, Pisces, surrender. So
Yeah. If you think of Saturn as like the parent, right, the parental figure, and then you think of Pisces as like all that is, like we're really turning towards like the infinite, inexpressible source of creation, to be our mother, father. And the analogy of a child, right, to a parent, right? If the child if in the example of the parent being like a really trustworthy, loving parent, right? If the child really trusts that the parent holds all of it in their awareness, right? Like the parent knows what the child needs, has their best interests at heart, then the child won't need to make a lot of demands, right? It can make a request. I know it's heard, but more than anything else, I'm just gonna trust my parents, right? I'm gonna trust my mother, father. They'll lead the way because they understand more than I do about how to get there. I don't even understand what money is. And what am I doing asking for a treehouse? I don't even know where you get the wood from. So it's just to appreciate that the way of this like divine all-knowing source, it's not just holding awareness of our individual story, because really there is no individual story. It's holding all of it. Like my unfolding and your unfolding are like inseparable. It's like as we become instruments of love, the very nature of that path is interconnection, is unity. It brings us together in healing and miraculous ways because it's no longer about us and our story of who we are and what we think we need. It's much better than that, deeper than that.
yeah, the soul. Yeah, beyond our egocentric structures and personalities. And I just want to say one thing about children and animals. So I feel that they don't have yet, or animals actually don't have an egocentric structure really. And children are sort of developing that, right? And so if you look around, people, adults that is, are least threatened by children and animals. And that's because they don't have the story, the judgment, the egocentric structure that creates those narratives and you know, all the things that go with that. So speaking to the Saturn in Pisces and Saturn being the parent, as it were, and you know, surrendering into trusting the teacher and all of that. I sort of lost the connection there. I had it in my mind before, but it's gone. But anyway, I was just thinking with what
Well, maybe it's the opposite too. That the adults, the authority figures, there's something to learn about these innocent, like this is that where you're going, like the state of innocence and trust, itself is a greater role model. Like the children and their innocence and openness to receive, openness to learn, their absence of precondition is such a teaching for actually where we're trying to bring ourselves.
yeah, which is very challenging as we, you know, grow through life and experience all the different things we do and all the conditioned imprints, so forth. You know, that's Uranus territory, right? We have to work with the way I see it is, because this is how they're also situated astronomically speaking. And then if you go to the mythology, it's all lined up in the same way as well. You've got to learn the lessons of Saturn. You've got to then dive into Chiron's cave and work very deeply on your own wounds, as it were. And then by doing that, you can have access to Uranus, the door of Uranus, you know. But you cannot go from not dealing with Saturn and suppressing Chiron straight to Uranus. We just can't do that, you know. Yeah,
everything has to be integrated
yeah,
eventually on the Saturn level. For as long as we're manifesting in a body, all of our realizations in the end of the day, it's not fully integrated until it's what we're living. And that's where Saturn is so important, because it really says create a life of congruency with what is most important, with what you're seeking to realize. But it is possible, right? We can dissociate, we can have a Kundalini experience that is completely unintegrated. But then the Saturn dimension is going to come in. It's very common. And Saturn and Pisces, great example. You know, we can have souls that are like bummed out, that like, oh man, I'm still here. Shit. Damn. Like I just had this deeply transcendent experience. Man, I still gotta poop. Like, oh man. Still gotta get a job. Still gotta do all these things. And that, man, that like there's deep healing in that.
yeah, absolutely. What's the saying? No mud, no lotus. So it's, you know, our mind gets in the way so much, right? The left linear mind, particularly, you know, Gemini, you know, gets in the way. It's very helpful and very useful, but it does get in the way a lot, you know, with its judgments and perceptions and fixed thoughts and, you know, all that sort of stuff. And we cannot be in the physical and just live this ecstatic, you know, life of being blissed out all the time. That's just not the reality of this earth plane, you know. So I feel that I love what my mentor, he says that living in spirit and in harmony with spirit and the divine source creation to all things is right here, right now. It's in every little thing that you do. It's not defined by, you know, being somewhere removed from society, let's say, and just having these kundalini experiences ongoing. The spiritual practice is in the physical, literally every single moment. That's where the teachings are, the deepest teachings. And then we do have, you know, those more phenomenal or ecstatic type of experiences as well, for sure. But for the most part, we are having these physical experiences on every single level 24/7. That's where the spiritual work really is, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.